Hello everybody and welcome to the 9th episode of the Daily Landscape Photography Critique, sponsored by K's Filters, and today we're going to be discussing the images of Miki Kleist. So let's get started. So here are Miki's images, and as you can see there's rather a lot of files, some serious exposure bracketing going on here, but we're going to start with this image, winter scene, I think at sunrise, because the fine detail in the ice is still there, and that tends to go once the sun has risen, overlooking a town and into that rising sun and those lovely warm colours, providing a contrast to the much cooler tones in the foreground. And Miki said in the notes that he sent to me that he was unsure on the composition of the foreground here, and I can understand why he's saying that. These scenes are very, very difficult to photograph because you have rocks that aren't completely covered in snow and ice sticking out of a white landscape. So that creates a lot of contrast, and it can be very hard to find structure when the areas that don't have snow or ice on can be quite random. So you're not even looking for nice stones necessarily. You're looking for stones that face in the right direction, that have the right amount of covering of ice and snow, and it can just be a real battle, to be perfectly honest. And I think he's done a good job here in difficult circumstances, and it's not helped by the fact that you have very linear horizontal lines in the background that are somewhat replicated in the foreground, so you don't have this sense of perspective or any idea of being led into the view, which is slightly unfortunate, but not too much Miki could have done about that, to be perfectly honest. So if we have a look at his raw file quickly, one thing I would say is that you don't need to be shooting this amount of blue sky if you think you might be cropping it out afterwards. And in my experience, I'm always cropping out almost the entirety of an empty blue sky. So my inclination would be to actually crop the sky to more like that. But what that means is when I'm out shooting, I try not to include the sky at all, because whilst I know I definitely won't want the blue sky, I might want some extra foreground, so you might as well pan down. So that would maybe be the first change that I would make in approach. Obviously, we haven't got an exposure bracket here, so we haven't quite got the highlights around the sun, which is a pity, but as we'll see, that's something that Miki has rectified in the other images. But in terms of specific advice for this exact scene, if I only had these rocks to work with, if my hunts around the rest of the hill proved fruitless, then I would be trying to come in closer to these rocks, I think, in the center here, and try to leave out this dark patch on the right and even this dark patch on the left, both of which I think are problems for the foreground. So we're just going to drag in the sides of the frame here initially, and you can see I'm including a little bit of that shadow because I think you need that to a certain extent. And we can even keep some of these crystalline structures in the foreground and lose a lot of that sky. So I think as a crop that's much stronger, although you're obviously now coming down to really quite a small resolution here, so not really an option with this image. But I think to do that physically by getting closer and shooting a little bit wider than this crop would suggest might be the way I would approach photographing this scene. And I think opening up the foreground a little bit more would be nice too, just to bring in a bit more detail, a bit more contrast and detail into that foreground area. And I'm doing a very inaccurate, well, I'm choosing a very inaccurate method here. It's not a precise way of doing this, but you know, something like that, which is too much. Please don't criticize me. It's an idea, not a solution. Yeah, I think I'd be trying to take the image in that kind of direction. Now onto this lighthouse image. I'm afraid I don't have too much to say about this, simply because it is a very simple minimalist image, and Miki, I think, had some concerns about the color here, and he has added a fair bit of saturation. So I've just had a quick go at an edit that I think is more realistic, or very realistic even, and you get these sort of washed out colors that you would expect when the sun's got a bit higher in the sky. I don't incidentally think that this is worse. I don't see the need to saturate more unless you want to create the impression of sunset, which maybe this leans a bit more towards. But I think if this were mine and I was photographing these kinds of subjects more often, I might be trying this sort of high key approach to make it feel a bit more industrial, a bit more modernist. I don't know exactly, but these kind of desaturated images I've always quite liked when it comes to architectural subjects, and I've never really experimented with it myself, but maybe that's one direction to consider. But the composition is perfectly good. It's a rule of thirds composition, so it can feel a little bit predictable, I suppose, but otherwise I quite like it. It balances naturally. But yeah, a simple photo with not too much to be said otherwise. And I won't scroll through these one by one because there's quite a few. And actually, this is a good time to mention that really you only need to exposure bracket when you have a very high contrast scene. And generally in landscape photography, that's when you're shooting into the light. So this would be a circumstance to shoot an exposure bracket. And I would shoot a 3-stop exposure bracket, 1.5 stops apart. So 3 images, 1.5 stops apart. And I think that would give you all the tonal range that you would need. My experience trying to do bigger brackets than that is that you can never really bring them together and make that enormous tonal range look realistic anyway. So that's why I choose 3 stops. But again, this third scene that we're just about to discuss, you just don't need to do these exposure brackets at all. Because you can capture everything in a single frame. So this does have a nice lead-in in contrast to that first scene, a very obvious lead-in, this river here, but it creates nice flowing lines through the image and some nice texture. There's some good interest in the clouds, and I can see the appeal of this scene, particularly as part of a collection of images showing an area. I think it doesn't quite have that impact, that interest, to stand alone as a big print on a wall perhaps, but it's still a very nice image. It's a pity about this settlement, I think, to the top left, because the river somewhat directs us towards it, so it does catch your eye. But I suspect that maybe this was the best rapid on the stream, and so you couldn't sort of walk uphill to block it with this cliff here. And it all works pretty nicely. I think maybe this central area of white water is a bit too white and featureless, and there's a bit of a magenta cast going on. So if you want to spot these casts, as I've said in other videos, you can just go nuts with your saturation, and you really shouldn't be seeing purples in skies unless it's at a sunset and the clouds are being lit red, and you can sometimes get those purpley effects then, but certainly not at this time of day. So I won't go into a full edit here, but in fact, let's just undo that crazy version. I won't go into a full edit here, but if we just compare roughly where I think it should be in terms of color naturally. So you can certainly make an argument for warming this up, increasing the color temperature, because obviously the light is quite blue here, and you might want to just take some of that out to bring some more of these yellows through. But the magenta probably shouldn't be there. And I haven't spent too much time on this edit, but one thing I have done is just darken down this central pool here. Let's just make that a bit larger. This central splash pool, just to bring a bit more texture and color into that area. So just a very quick local adjustment with a soft edged brush, darkening the exposure and boosting the contrast. So a nice image that, and some minor editing tweaks I think can really help it along its way. Onto this final and most spectacular of the 4 images, an absolutely gorgeous sunset here and a really tranquil feel to the image thanks to this calm water. I don't know if this is a large lake or a sea loch or a fjord even. It's probably up in Norway, isn't it? But or Sweden maybe, up in the Scandinavian areas. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely scene this, and it's been a long time since I photographed a sunset or sunrise like this, I have to say. They don't come around too often. And I think it balances nicely. Would I include this much sky myself? Possibly not, but I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it. I think if this were my image, I'm kind of okay with the saturation around the sun. It's actually the blues that look a little bit cartoonish to me. So we'll see when we edit the raw file that this has been saturated to a certain extent, but I think around the sun it's actually fine. It's just that bit of blue that looks a little bit too much to my eye. So yeah, this is a lovely scene, but let's have a look at the raw file and discuss maybe a slightly different approach. And actually, here's my edit. So I haven't done too much here, just created a DNG file from just 3 of those 6 or 7 exposures, because you only need 3 exposures really to make a digital negative HDR file like I have here. Now, I haven't done a crop, but this does give you a sense, I think, of what more accurate color is here. And I think Miki has added a fair bit more magenta and possibly a bit more blue to get to his color range, and then added a lot of saturation or vibrance even, I suspect, because the saturation does a horrible job as usual. So it's somewhere in this area. I wouldn't personally do that much with the color, and I try to stick to realistic color balances. So what would happen generally is the sun went lower here, is then you'd start to get those reds in the clouds, but perhaps you'd lose the light further up, and that's why this exposure has been chosen. But nevertheless, I personally like to represent lighting as realistic as possible, and especially when it's spectacular like this, because then I can have this really nice natural range of lighting in my portfolio, and then those very special moments where you do get your red skies stand out all the more. Now, I haven't cropped this in, and I thought that was worth discussing. So I think Miki is right to crop off some of the bottom here, because it starts to resolve this problem that you have with this big area of fairly featureless stone compared to the rest of the foreground on the right hand side of the image here. So you probably do want to crop in here something like this, and then you need to crop off the right as well to get that stone out of the edge of the frame, because that really will catch the eye. So something like this looks about right, and then I'd want to lose some of the sky, and actually I would lose a lot more personally. I'd come in something like this. So this is maybe a bit closer to how I would try to shoot the scene. But if I just reset that crop quickly, then I think really what I would be doing here is trying to shoot this just a little bit further to the left, because that gets rid of this stone on the right, and you can start to bring these pools across the frame to create more balance across that foreground, to allow you to have more foreground. And then I would still be trying to shoot in landscape, but with that amount of sky and a wider frame, if you like. I think that would be my approach there. But some lovely images there, Miki. Thank you very much for sending them in. A fair bit more for me to discuss, because there's a range of things that I think you could improve here, but hopefully you've found that helpful, and I will see you all in the next one.